Can you talk to me a little bit about how, because you've spoken to me before a little bit about how maybe you feel like you've disconnected from your emotions, or you find it hard actually to access your emotions, whether that's around grief or just more generally. Just wondering if you could share your experience with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think principally all of it started around the time of my dad's death, and
How old were you when your dad died?
so my dad died in 2006 of a brain tumor, grade 4 glioblastoma, and around that time I really looked to my mum, and she was this pillar of strength, and these notions of like these notions of not necessarily displaying how you feel and talking about your emotions. And I was often told by people far older than me that I needed to be strong for my mum, and I needed to support my family and all the rest of it. And as a 8-9-year-old, I think I took that very seriously, and I should say that I put that pressure on myself as well. It wasn't just other people. But subsequently, for a long time, I then did push things away, and that was also a self-protective mechanism. I think that there's a lot about my dad's stuff that is a blur, and I think subconsciously that's because it was so painful. But then I had reached a stage when I was maybe 17, 18, and my brother Toby, he also developed glioblastoma, and he died as well, which was again horrific. But I had realized by then the way I had disconnected was really damaging me, both in my personal life and in relation to my grief. And so since then, I've really tried to combat that, and I attempt to be much more open with my friends. I'm not always, I'm still learning, and I think they're also still learning in relation to asking and all this other stuff. But it's something that I struggle with, and I think I will go on struggling with for a long, long time. And I mean, when we spoke about this last, the metaphor I used was thinking about this like a dam that, and I can sometimes physically feel this in my chest, and that, I feel the emotion swelling and swelling and swelling, and the water is smashing up against the seawall, or whatever you want to call it. But part of me wants it to break, and part of me wants to really feel it all, and another part of me is terrified of that because of the weight that might release, and the way in which that might impact my life, and damage the peace and the way of being that I'm comfortable with now. So it's an incredibly complex thing, and I think there are things that make me feel more connected, but I think there are a lot of seminal moments in my life, like I don't know. I mean, I don't even know if I want kids, but kids, or I don't even know if I want to get married, but married. These moments where I suppose, you know, the people closest to me in my life are meant to be there, and they won't be. And you know, those are kind of two really, really simple examples, but there are thousands. There's so many other ones. And so, you know, like all of us, I'm still learning about how this plays out in my life. And I've been really, really grateful that I have kind of decided to change tack and try and open up and sorry, there's a mosquito by my ear. Fuck off.
Step too far.
Yeah.
Last drop of water in the dam.
But yeah, I mean, the podcast that I run is like an iteration of me really trying to engage not only with other people but myself, and to yeah, keep on giving others and myself this feeling that, you know, I'm not alone, and if I do want to be vulnerable, it's absolutely fine.
Yeah, it almost sounds like you maybe had like a blueprint sort of set from when you were little, of that idea of strength, and to be strong means to not show your feelings or kind of express what you're going through, and kind of always be all right and always smile, always be polite, whatever it might have been. And that is quite hard to break. And I don't know, it kind of sounds like it's almost playing out at a subconscious level as much as it is at a conscious level. It's not that you're necessarily choosing now to not feel your feelings, it's just that that's kind of always been how you do it.
Yeah.
And I think things like the podcast, like you were just speaking about, are trying to almost break that blueprint and set out a new blueprint that you can go forward with, maybe.
Yeah, I think so. Like the podcast and other kind of strategies, I suppose, I'm using in my life is an attempt to shift my internal narrative, from vulnerability as weakness to vulnerability as a strength in itself. And so like that completely reconceptualizes what strength means for me. And I would agree in that this is both like something that I'm trying to figure out internally, in my head, but also subconsciously, and I don't necessarily have control over that much. But it's also about kind of the ways of being that have just been concretized in my life since I was very young. Like, despite the fact that I have said that I'm trying to open up and all the rest of it, like, I think I still keep myself to myself because, well, to a certain extent, because of what's happened and because of the pattern that has set. And so as I said, like it's like an iterative thing, and it will change and alter as time goes on. And also, you know, the way in which I kind of interact with my grief, like when I released the podcast for the first time, I felt really, really in control and really connected both to myself in a way, but or to this ambition that I had, that I really wanted to release it. And it was a monumental moment in terms of like a statement of vulnerability. But in a way that was momentary. And then, you know, I subsequently felt really disconnected for the next, you know, X number of months when I wasn't engaging with it in a way that was perhaps what I was advocating for in the podcast. And so, yeah, it's I mean, we've spoken about this before at great length, but it's you can never really have a true handle on it, I think. And that's fine, because that's just the nature of the beast, which is a weird way to put it, but
I guess that's just made me think there's almost like levels of vulnerability. There's like acknowledging that this thing has happened, like not denying it, not trying to hide from it. That's one level. The next is sort of like, I guess, being able to articulate that experience, express yourself. I was stuck in this for a long time, and I think it was really helpful for a while, but I just like intellectualized my grief so much. Like I was reading so much about it. I would talk about it at great length, as I did on your podcast. I can, and I feel like in some ways I'm so open with it, but then there's that other layer, which is embracing the more messy stuff. Like I feel like I can cry a little bit and I can talk about it, but it still feels a little bit controlled, and it feels like, no, I'm showing my vulnerability, but only this far. And actually, I know there's like a layer beneath that in me, which sometimes I am able to show and access, like if I feel like with certain people, or I don't know, just in certain situations. But most of the time that is sort of like clenched very hard in a little box, and it's like it can come out in a little burst, and then I'm like, oh no, that was too much, and it just feels like too overwhelming. And I think because I was like obsessed with this idea of needing to be vulnerable for a while, I got really annoyed that I couldn't be more like that. But it's kind of just, I've come to accept, like, okay, this is where I am at this point, and there will be times when like the dam breaks, if you want to use that metaphor, and there'll be times when the water stays very tightly in it, and that's fine, because we can only do so much, and we can only trust ourselves so much in certain situations. I think is part of me being more vulnerable, is being like trusting myself that I will survive if I break down, or people actually, it's like that I will get through it, and also that people will stick with me, because I think I have had this huge fear that if I'm too messy for someone, like my friends, my family, a partner, people at uni, whoever it might be, if I'm like too messy and emotional, which I know sometimes comes out when I'm by myself, if I show that to other people, like, are they gonna like me, or are they just gonna think I'm absolutely nuts and like something's wrong with me? And I can rationalize it, and if someone else ever said that to me, I'd say, what are you talking about? Like, obviously I'm gonna love you, obviously I'm gonna like want to like be there for you, but there is that fear that but I can't show that. And I think that has come from a similar pattern to what you were talking about, of when my brother died when I was 10. The pattern was sort of laid out by my mum especially, and we've spoken about this since, and like, I don't resent her for it at all, and we have really like lovely conversations about it, but she was very much like, smile, like, come on, like, let's get on with it. And we were kind of praised for like being such like a resilient family, and actually like a lot of that resilience was just not being ourselves and not showing how we felt. And it was and like that's sort of like, it's been definitely a process of trying to break that down and kind of relate to vulnerability and relate to grief in a different sort of way, which does allow for those more messy things. And when I do that, I feel so much better, but it's not always easy.
No, I mean, I think inherently all of this stuff is really, really hard. Like the idea of unlearning things that have been ingrained in you is inherently complex. I mean, even
as well, you kind of get somewhere and then you're like, okay, now I'm going to go backwards for a bit.
exactly. I mean, look, I mean, there are things that I could do today, right now, that I know would maybe make me vulnerable, or would maybe pushed me a bit further towards unlocking the dam, or however you want to phrase it. But I think there's also an argument to say sometimes you're just not ready for it. And I seldom look at pictures of my brother. I find it easy with my dad, but with Toby, I mean, even saying his name is piercing. And that's something that I really desperately want to change. But at the moment it's still really hard, really, really hard. And at uni, I could only do that when I'd had a drink, and I've phased out of that now. But yeah, I mean, they're just you can, as you say, like really try and attempt to be vulnerable on all of these different levels, and yeah, there are some that the cost, or the fear of the cost, or whatever it is just too high. Yeah. And so
it's important not to force it, and not to beat yourself up over the fact that you aren't ready to do that yet.
Yeah. And that's the thing, like the word expectation, and we've spoken about this a lot recently, is rife in the way that we think about our grief, and the way that we are thinking about how we should act in relation to whatever situation we're in, and who we need to protect, and who, how emotional we need to be, and like
sometimes we're too emotional, sometimes we're not emotional enough.
yeah. Like there's no you can't win. And the relationship between expectation and guilt is something that I've felt so much in my life, particularly in relation to being vulnerable. Like, the idea that someone could lose a family member in a very similar situation, or very different. Doesn't necessarily matter how they lose them, but or a friend rather as well. And they're in sobs of tears and all the rest of it. And I just think, God, am I a terrible person for not being like that? And I don't feel like that now, but it's because I have an understanding myself that was greater than it was when I was 16, 18, whatever. But yeah, I mean, for people in that position, it's really, really difficult, and I think that's the benefit of both this space and so many others, in that it gives people an opportunity to hear other people say, what, it was actually like that for me too, and I'm doing better. I'm not where I want to be. Perhaps we should maybe even question the extent to which I need to be in this vulnerable place. Like,
there's a lot of pressure. It's another expectation, isn't it?
Yeah. I think, like, in a way, we should have total freedom with the way in which we feel, and that's a very kind of idealistic viewpoint, but I think it's something we should strive for. Because it can make things slightly easier. I'm kind of making this too conceptual, but
I agree. And I think with that freedom to feel how you feel, whether that's really emotional, angry, anxious, sad, completely numb, not thinking about it, distracting yourself, whatever it might be, with that is kind of like a trust that you are doing the best that you can, even if sometimes you feel like a shit person. I feel like there's so much of grief which you're going through this really difficult thing and you're also just beating yourself up because you're not doing it properly, or maybe you're not caring enough, or maybe you're worrying about it too much and you're not putting enough thought into your day-to-day life, or whatever it might be. It's just a constant sort of battleground. And actually, if we were just
Yeah,
sort of
yeah, exactly.
okay, today I felt this and I did that, and maybe that looks great on paper and my therapist would say well done, and maybe the next day I do something which is completely stupid and I upset loads of people, but that's fine. I was also doing my best then. But it's hard to trust that you're doing all right sometimes.
Yeah. No, it's true. It's true.
Just one other thought.
No, go on. You go.
I was just going to say one other thought that I'd had in terms of not forcing yourself to be vulnerable is that I think when I like first started thinking about vulnerability, I was like, right, I've got to sort of like be open with everyone. And especially because I was really passionate about making grief a topic that was spoken about more openly. Like that's what I do in my work. Like it almost had that like more like social side to it as well, in terms of like how we talk about it culturally. But it meant that I was sometimes sharing things about myself with people that I maybe didn't know that well. And I think sometimes that's fine. You can connect with a stranger and it can be a really like meaningful, important conversation. And I am sometimes like incredibly vulnerable with people that I don't know that well. But I was kind of like doing it in lots of situations. And I sometimes came away from them feeling a bit like, oh, or like they didn't, it actually, I didn't need to do that. And I needed to be a bit more protective of my grief. And I actually needed to be less vulnerable. And like I kind of in certain situations where I kind of built this like false sense of like intimacy with people where like because we'd like spoken about something like really deep that then I was really confused about what sort of level friendship we had. And just I think it's been learning like sometimes it's maybe not appropriate, and like don't beat yourself up if you tell someone something and they respond badly, because you know that's on them. And like but sometimes as well like you do need to say I could share loads of my life right now and I could share this really deep thing, or I might just say, oh, I don't fancy talking about it, or just pretend that it hasn't happened, or whatever it might be. Even sometimes like when I'm texting people recently, sorry, I'm going off one now. Like if someone says like, how are you doing? Even if it's a close friend, I kind of have this like instinctively, I want to say, yeah, this is going all right. Maybe this isn't going quite so well. I'm kind of feeling this. And like sometimes I just need to say, yeah, good, thanks. How are you? And I think there's a danger with that like that's often people's instinct is just to say fine. And sometimes people need to delve into it more. But it's a fine line, isn't it? You can do it too much and you can kind of feel like you're constantly needing to explain yourself or constantly needing to be vulnerable. And that got me in a bit of a cycle of feeling like my whole identity was my grief, when actually to some people I just wanted to be like the girl on their course that they had a nice chat with. I didn't need to be the grief girl to everyone.
No, I think it's a really important point to make, in that being vulnerable doesn't actually really entail being an open book all the time. And I think, you know, it doesn't mean you have to like, it shouldn't mean you betray yourself and put yourself in compromising positions. And I mean, I've also done that in the past. And so yeah, a lot of this I'm learning, or I kind of think at least, is that it's just you know, it's just tempting to reflect and listen to yourself, and then just be comfortable with whatever conclusion you come to. Like yeah, I mean, it just returns to this idea of freedom. But as I've said before, it's also like I'm learning about this and I'm getting it wrong and I'm getting it right in whatever way that is for me.
6 months.
Yeah, exactly.
Different conversation.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
All this wisdom.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, this is where I'm at with my vulnerability now. Will I be at this same place? I don't know. Yeah. But for now, it's okay.